어떻게 돼야 되거나 봐.
So put this here.
So you put one here.
Actually, I'm not sure if you're allowed to go back.
The outreach elements for the project. My particular field is I'm a lecturer on games development, and I've previously worked in the games industry briefly, and it's the idea of using games, not just computer games, but board games for essentially an educational kind of purpose, sometimes referred to as serious games. So the meeting was kind of split into two. One half was doing, for want of a better term, more traditional outreach material. There's lots of interesting kind of gluing and sticking of things that could be used in the classroom and what have you, and so on. And then us, the other team, we were coming up with basically brainstorming different potential ways that games could be used for kind of different aspects of the science that NanoSpace does. One thing I thought was really important is to borrow some of the terminology from so-called ludology, like the analysis of how games work, is that we didn't want this to just be that the science was tacked on. One of my slides I'm going to be showing tomorrow says I didn't want to make basically NanoSpace Trivial Pursuit, or the other classic one is if it's a computer game, the loading screens have little factoids on them, and no one reads those. In fact, one of my former students admitted when they made a serious game like that, they had to slow down the loading time just so it displayed the messages for long enough so people could read them. It doesn't really need it anymore. The basic notion is that you can divide games up into so-called mechanics. It's like the little bits of kind of gameplay. So rolling a dice to move, draw a card here, the double jump in a computer game. What we want to do is make it so that those mechanics are linked as much as possible to the actual science that's being done. I think one of the interesting ideas that we came up with was a board game that we're calling, at this point, Life from Space. So the notion is that you have locations on a board which equate to locations within time and space within the universe. And you go there and you start to collect the different kind of materials, and then you start to construct more and more kind of complicated molecules until you can start to seed Earth with those molecules and eventually bring forth life. One of the things we're going to be asking the rest of the NanoSpace guys is, what locations do you think they should be? Where in time and space? What materials will be made there? What would be the progression to get to life? I quite like this because if you sort of flip the story, this is almost exactly like the actual mechanics, how I sort of see them working, is like a very popular game that's already kind of out there. I could see it kind of mapping across. So a game called Lords of Waterdeep. So I'd be interested to see how much we can sort of beg, steal, borrow from that game. A couple of the other ones that we came up with was one that we're calling Chemomenos. Essentially, it's like triangular kind of like the trionomos kind of idea, but each one is an atom. And it was interesting, we made these things and just sitting there, connecting them up so that the bonding working was very strangely engaging. And so there's a concept in tabletop games called a game-like experience. So it borrows bits and pieces from how a board game works, but it's not actually a full game. The classic example is something called the story cubes. So essentially they are a set of dice that have pictures on them for different things, and they come in different themed sets. And the idea is that you roll them, see what images come up, and then you make a story kind of based around that. So it's sort of a game-like way of kind of inspiring kind of creativity. And so for a start, for the simple one is you just sit there and just play with them, and just by naturally just playing with these triangular pieces, you sort of get some idea of how the bonding between these different kind of atoms work. And then the idea is that as potentially as a kind of an educational resource, you could start to add just a little bit more structure, a little bit more game kind of to it, and once again map that directly to the science of it. So at the start, you're playing your dominoes down, and instead of matching numbers, you're matching bonds, and you've got to make bigger and nicer kind of atoms on the tabletop. But then more difficult versions of it is you have to actually follow the rules of chemistry, or you have to name the molecule that you've made at the end of it. So each time you're kind of progressively kind of making it more and more, as it were, real to the science. The last one is one we're kind of jokingly referring to as Buckyburt, and that one is essentially flying around on the surface of one of these kind of nanomolecules, and essentially you're leaving a trail behind you of kind of blocked off cells, blocked off polygons. And the notion is that you've got to fight and kind of put the other player into a corner so that they can't kind of progress forward. And once again, I like this because on a small molecule, it's very much like a sort of a tit for tat sort of puzzle sort of game. But I can see as this molecules get bigger and bigger and bigger, it's going to become more dynamic, because obviously there's more space to kind of go to. You can more free form how you flow around the space. And this looks to me almost exactly like the light cycles game from the Tron movies. And I think with a few extra things that possibly add a little bit more slightly combative kind of elements, it could be made into quite an interesting, quite a dynamic game as you're flying around. Obviously, the beautiful thing about this is the level design just are the molecules. There's no kind of gameplay kind of involved in that. It's just literally is the molecules, and we can pull in the files that the scientists use to potentially kind of make these ones. And that's the one we're hoping to get a little local indie studio from where I used to work to actually build a kind of a playable demo of that to kind of demonstrate that back to the rest of the cost action. Essentially what we want to do here is show them what we've done and say, we don't want to really go forward with these until we've got your input of what's the actual science you'd like to see there, or at least we want to keep as close to the science as possible. Obviously, sometimes we're going to have to break it a bit to make it playable, but for the most part, we want it to be in there. I think the fun one's going to be the life from science, because no one really knows how that works. So it'll almost be interesting to see people trying to figure out, well, we sort of know that bit, we don't really know that bit, but we've got to put something in there for the rules of the game. That's going to be quite an interesting one.